I knew Karen was petty. I knew she got drunk on her little clipboard power. But I didn't know she'd go so far as to suspend my pool access over a towel. A towel. 12 minutes unattended while I took a call inside. Next thing I know, there's a notice on my door citing me for abandoned personal property and a handwritten note in pink ink that read, "Privileges revoked until further notice." I laughed at first, thought maybe it was a joke, but Karen doesn't joke. Karen enforces. What she didn't know, what no one in the HOA knew, is that I run a quiet little side business importing rare aquatic species. Exotic fish, to be specific. I've got tanks in my garage bigger than most people's bathtubs. I've raised everything from electric eels to freshwater stingrays. So when she took my piece and locked me out of the pool I helped build, when she banned my grandkids during their summer visit, something inside me snapped. I didn't want revenge. I wanted symbolism. I wanted to give Karen a reason to be afraid of the water. So I called in a favor, and I ordered 27 red-bellied piranhas. Before we dive back in, I just want to say, these stories are made with a lot of care, imagination, and a deep love for the strange. If this kind of weird little adventure speaks to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for being part of the journey. Now, back to the story. It was a hot Tuesday morning, the kind where the sun bakes the pavement and the air smells like freshly cut grass and barbecue leftovers. I'd gone to the community pool like I always did. 7:30 a.m. sharp, same chair, same towel, same quiet laps to start my day. That morning I swam 6 slow laps, then got out and draped my towel over the lounge chair. My phone buzzed. Call from my daughter. She needed to talk about something school-related for my grandkids. I stepped inside for a few minutes to take the call where it was quiet. 12 minutes. That's how long I was gone. When I came back out, the towel was gone. So was my chair. And in its place was a bright orange violation notice flapping in the breeze like a flag of war. I stared at it, squinting in the sunlight, thinking it had to be some mistake. Abandoned personal property left in shared area. Section 5.2 of HOA bylaws. Pool access temporarily revoked. I stood there dripping wet, stunned, looking around like maybe someone was playing a prank. But I already knew. Only one person in the entire neighborhood would see a towel and think, violation. Karen. She had been circling the pool earlier like a shark in a sundress, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other. I didn't even know clipboards came in pink until she took office. Now there were 5 different shades of them, all color-coded for enforcement. I grabbed the notice and marched straight over to her place, towel still wet in my hand. She lived 3 doors down, behind the hedge trimmed to look like a swan. Knocked twice, firm but polite. She opened the door already smiling, like she'd been waiting for me. "Good morning, Mr. Devlin," she said, like we were about to talk about fresh jam or something civil. "If this is about the towel, I'd be happy to direct you to the grievance form." "Nope," I said, cutting her off. "This is about common sense." She blinked. That threw her off more than yelling would have. 12 minutes, I said. That's how long I was gone. "The rule says unattended property. Doesn't matter the time." "It matters to everyone with a brain." Her smile didn't move. "Then I suppose you'll enjoy your time off from the pool to reflect on that." I just nodded once. Then I turned around and walked back to my house. That was the day I knew. Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. The next day I tried to handle things like a reasonable man. I showed up at the HOA office, which Karen had taken over and redecorated to look like some twisted cross between a beach cabana and a courtroom. Seashell decor on the wall, but every surface covered in neatly stacked policy binders. It smelled like lemon-scented tyranny. She was sitting behind the desk with her signature smugness, sorting through a stack of violation slips like she was dealing out tarot cards. "Mr. Devlin," she said without looking up, How nice of you to stop by. I'd like my pool key back, I said plainly. She lifted her eyes slowly, like it pained her to do it. Have you submitted a formal apology? I actually laughed. For what, Karen? For having a towel and a phone call? Her expression didn't change. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out one of those laminated HOA code sheets, flipping directly to a highlighted section like she'd been practicing this move in the mirror. Section 5.2, she said, tapping it. No personal items may be left unattended in shared areas. That includes towels, chairs, sunscreen bottles, books, and unaccompanied beverages. Unaccompanied beverages? I asked. Are you serious? Deadly, she said. There was an incident in 2019. Ants. I stared at her, genuinely unsure if she was messing with me. She wasn't. Karen believed in these rules like they were scripture. The problem was she only enforced them when it served her. I'd seen her neighbor Janice leave a cooler poolside for a whole afternoon. No ticket. I'd seen kids leave their floaties scattered everywhere. No warning. But me? I get a towel ticket and a suspension. I asked her flat out, "Why me?" She folded her hands and gave me that slow, rehearsed smile. Because you push boundaries, Mr. Devlin, and in a community like ours, that's dangerous. I served on this HOA before you even moved in. And yet here we are, she said, pulling open another drawer. She slid my pool key across the desk, but attached to it was a red tag that said, "Suspended, pending compliance review." My blood boiled, but I kept calm. This isn't about the pool, I said. This is about control. She didn't answer, just smiled again and wrote something down in her logbook. When I got home, I stared at that red tag for a long time. I knew then this wasn't over. And if she wanted to play by the rules, she'd better be ready for mine. My daughter and her kids rolled into town on Friday evening, van loaded down with snacks, floaties, and enough sunscreen to cover a small army. They'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks. It was tradition. Every summer they came down, and every morning we'd start the day at the pool. My grandkids loved the water. Cannonballs, Marco Polo, those weird underwater handstands that kids think are magic. It was joy, pure and simple. That Saturday morning we showed up at the gate just after 8. The sun was barely up, birds still chirping. My granddaughter Ellie had already kicked off her flip-flops and was halfway through a story about how she planned to beat her brother in a splash contest. But the gate wouldn't open. I tried my key. Nothing. The red tag was still attached. "Grandpa, why won't it open?" she asked. That's when I noticed the sign taped to the gate, a fresh notice in Karen's favorite bubble font. Reminder: suspended residents may not access the pool even with guests present. No exceptions. I stood there, reading it over and over again, my hands gripping the chain link like I was visiting someone in prison. I could feel Ellie watching me. My grandson squinted at the paper. "But Mom said you had a pool," he whispered. "I do," I said quietly. "At least, I used to." I didn't say anything else. I just turned around and led them back to the van. Ellie was quiet. That was the worst part. She's never quiet, not even when she's asleep. We went to the community park instead, which was basically 2 sun-baked benches and a tired plastic slide. The kids made the best of it, but I couldn't stop thinking about that gate, about Karen, about how she looked me in the eye and said I was dangerous for pushing boundaries. That's when the idea started forming. At first it was just frustration, buzzing at the back of my mind. But then I thought about my garage, about the tanks, about the shipments I'd been getting for years, the connections I'd built, the clients I'd helped find just the right balance of beauty and fear. I wasn't a rule breaker. I was a fish guy, and if Karen wanted to turn our peaceful neighborhood pool into a fortress of fear and laminated shame, then maybe it was time she learned what fear actually looked like. That was the moment I snapped. That was the moment I started planning. Joe answered on the second ring, same gravel voice I remembered from our days in the trade. "Devlin, been a while." What's the emergency? You still got that tank set up in your barn? I asked. There was a pause, then a cautious, yeah, why? I took a deep breath. I need to borrow it, and I need you to help me order something dramatic. Joe was quiet for a long second. You finally losing it? Probably, I said. But if I don't do something about this HOA demon, I'm going to end up on the evening news for strangling a woman with a pool noodle. He chuckled. Fair enough. What are we talking? Electric eels? Stingrays? You want the kind of fish that make people rethink life? Piranhas, I said. Red-bellied, fast, angry, and preferably hungry. There was a sharp intake of breath, then a whistle. You serious? As a chlorine check on inspection day. Another pause. Then Joe said something that sealed the deal. Let's make Karen regret getting certified in passive-aggressive warfare. By Sunday morning, I was on the road to Joe's property, out past the edge of town, where the air smelled like hay and freedom. He still had the old barn, half aquarium supply depot, half mad scientist lair. Tanks lined the walls, bubbling softly. A few of them still held fish, mostly harmless stuff now, but the setup was still top-notch. We set up a transport tank and got to work putting in filtration, aeration, and a quiet heater. Joe, bless him, didn't ask why I was doing this. He just asked, how many? 20, I said. Make it 27, he replied. Odd numbers are spookier. He called in a favor from a guy in Florida. 3 days, tops, he said. In the meantime, we tested the tank and made sure the fish would survive transport. I spent those nights driving home, wired with purpose, checking the HOA Facebook group obsessively. Karen was bragging about her latest crackdown on unauthorized accessories at the clubhouse. Someone had hung a beach towel too close to a hibiscus plant. She was tightening the noose. I was sharpening the teeth. On Tuesday, Joe called. They're here, and they're feisty. Perfect. I drove out that night staring at those little monsters in the tank. Silvery scales, red bellies, rows of razor teeth flashing every time they bumped into the glass. This is insane, I whispered, but Joe just patted the tank. This is therapy. And just like that, Operation Bite Back was officially on. Karen had always been a creature of routine. Same 6:15 a.m. walks with her little yapping dog, same Tuesday afternoon HOA patrols, same smug glances through her oversized sunglasses any time she passed my driveway. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Karen had a secret. And I was about to uncover it. Joe and I set up our first recon session on Wednesday night. We parked my truck just far enough down the street so we wouldn't be obvious, then hunkered down with iced coffees, binoculars, and a notebook Joe labeled Operation Chlorine Queen. Around 10:30 p.m., just as I was about to doze off, she emerged. Karen, in a robe, carrying a tote bag. She looked around like a cartoon villain, then shuffled over to the pool gate, punched in a code, and slipped inside. I sat up straight. No way. Joe raised the binoculars. She's got a floaty. Sure enough, a bright pink flamingo. She unrolled it, inflated it halfway with a small pump, and tossed it into the pool. Then she stripped off the robe, revealing a sparkly one-piece swimsuit that screamed "Power Brunch" in Boca Raton, and stepped into the water like it was her private spa. For 30 minutes she swam alone, long lazy laps, sipping from a stainless steel wine tumbler and humming to herself. I couldn't make out the song, but I'd bet money it was something smug, probably Celine Dion. Joe just shook his head. Pool's closed to everyone else, but she's out here doing mermaid yoga in secret. This woman, I muttered, watching her glide around the deep end like she hadn't banned my grandkids for daring to laugh too loud. She's out here enjoying the peace she's stolen from the rest of us. Karen floated on her back under the stars, wine in hand, her laminated rules tucked neatly into her tote on the edge of the pool. I pulled out my phone and hit record. The hypocrisy was enough to boil water. The next 2 nights confirmed it. Same routine, Same sneaky swim. Once, she even lit candles around the edge of the pool like it was her personal resort. Meanwhile, the rest of us couldn't so much as peek through the fence without risking a fine. That's when I knew exactly how I was going to do it. Not during the day. Not when the HOA could spin it as vandalism or some teenage prank. Karen was going to meet the fish on her time, on one of her secret swims, in her sacred pool, under the quiet moonlight. Let the chlorine games begin. You'd be surprised how fast a neighborhood turns on a tyrant once someone speaks up first. I started with Linda from 2 doors down. She's 72, crocheted American flags for veterans, and once got fined $150 for patio clutter because she left her yarn basket outside during a windstorm. I invited her over for lemonade and casually asked, "You ever wish Karen got a taste of her own pool rules?" She didn't even blink. I'd pay good money to see that woman scream. Next was Marcus, a high school history teacher who got cited for having a garden hose improperly coiled. His actual words when I explained the plan? "I teach about revolutions for a living. Count me in." Then came the Patel twins. They ran a food truck, had been warned repeatedly for excessive driveway aromas from cooking at home. Karen called it olfactory aggression. I called it dinner. They were very in. By the weekend we had a crew, me, Joe, Linda, Marcus, the Patels, and even Old Man Jenkins, who still hadn't forgiven Karen for banning wind chimes after his wife passed. Said they sounded mournful, he'd muttered. It was amazing, Grace, you lunatic. I called our first meeting in my garage. Joe brought a folding table, I made coffee, and we all gathered around like we were planning a bake sale, except instead of cupcakes, we had a whiteboard that read, "Pool plus fish/freedom." I laid it all out. The surveillance, the towel incident, Karen's nightly swims, and of course the piranhas. Joe even passed around photos. Most folks leaned in with a mix of fear and admiration. "These little guys," Marcus said, peering at one photo, "they look angry." "They are angry," Joe said proudly, "and fast." I was honest. I told them we weren't doing this to hurt her, just to scare her, to break the illusion that she could use the pool like her personal palace while keeping the rest of us in check with a laminated hammer. We wouldn't be there when it happened. No confrontation. Just one unexpected, unforgettable swim. Linda raised her hand. "If she survives, do we still get to vote her out?" "Absolutely," I said. That's when she pulled out her phone and started a group chat labeled Splashback 25. The plan was forming fast, and the neighborhood, after years of keeping their heads down, hiding wind chimes and measuring grass blades, was ready to bite back, with teeth. The next few days felt like prepping for a heist, only instead of blueprints and getaway cars, we had fish tanks, thermometers, and a shared Google Doc called Operation Chomp. Joe took lead on the logistics. He knew exactly how to prep the piranhas for a short-term chlorinated dip without sending them belly up. Turns out, with the right pH buffer and some neutralizing tablets, we could buy them 3 to 4 hours of safe swim time. More than enough to make our point. We converted Joe's barn tank into a mobile setup, reinforced cooler, aeration pump, oxygen tablets, portable heater. It looked like a rolling sushi bar of doom. Each fish was separated for transport, then reintroduced to the group the day before release, so they'd be at peak Team Chomp mentality. Joe called it warming up the pack. I didn't ask questions. Meanwhile, the team was running silent ops across the neighborhood. Marcus monitored Karen's evening patterns with military precision. The Patel twins created a scent distraction, barbecued lamb, bless them, to draw Karen's dog walkers away from the pool path. Linda was in charge of lookout. She borrowed her grandson's walkie-talkies and patrolled from her porch like a retired spy. We set the date for Friday night. Weather forecast showed a cool evening, clear skies, low wind, perfect night for a secret swim. or a rude aquatic awakening. Joe and I did a dry run the night before, drove the cooler in his van, parked 2 blocks away, and wheeled it down the sidewalk disguised in pool maintenance tarps. At the fence, I slipped through the gap near the back bushes where Karen's hedges had a weak spot. It was like the pool itself, wanted to be liberated. The intake valve sat near the deep end. Joe popped the hatch, tested the temp. 81 degrees, he whispered. Perfect. He dropped a test strip in. Chlorine's a bit high, could sting their eyes. You think they'll complain? I asked. He shrugged. Only if they unionize. We both grinned. It was ridiculous. It was insane. It was glorious. Back at Joe's, the piranhas were restless. Their scales glinted under the barn light, tiny teeth flashing with every movement. I leaned down to the tank, looked one dead in its little soulless eyes. You're not just fish, I told them. You're a message. Joe handed me a sealed bag of neutralizer. And tonight, that message bites. Everything was set. Timing, chemistry, escape routes. All we had to do now was wait. It was just past midnight when the garage door creaked open and Joe rolled out the cooler. We didn't speak much, just nods, the kind that said we were past the point of no return. The neighborhood was dead quiet, save for the hum of distant sprinklers and the occasional hoot of an owl. The moon hung low and full, casting silver over the pool like it had been waiting for this moment too. We parked 2 blocks down and wheeled the cooler behind the hedges. Linda's porch light flicked off, our signal. Marcus checked in on the walkie. No dog walkers, coast's clear. We slipped through the back fence gap and crept to the pool's edge. Joe popped the lid. The piranhas stirred instantly, little silver torpedoes with fire in their eyes. He dropped the neutralizer and the pH buffer into the cooler, swirled it, waited. Then we tipped the container over the maintenance panel and watched them flow, a living current of attitude and tiny razor blades. They vanished under the surface without a ripple. Perfect. We slipped away before the first ripple reached the center of the pool. From across the street, hidden behind Linda's rose bushes, we waited. At 12:37 a.m., the gate clicked open. Karen, robe on, floaty under one arm, wine tumbler in the other. She paused, scanned the area, then tiptoed in like a teenager sneaking out to meet trouble. She wasn't wearing shoes. That detail stuck with me. Her toes gripped the concrete like she owned it. She set down her bag, unrolled the flamingo floaty, and placed it in the shallow end. Then, with all the grace of a smug ballerina, she slipped off the robe and stepped into the water. I'll give her this, she moved confidently. One arm outstretched, holding the tumbler high, she waded in chest deep and let out a sigh like this was the happiest moment of her day. If only she knew. The plan was forming fast, and the neighborhood, after years of keeping their heads down, hiding wind chimes and measuring grass blades, was ready to bite back, with teeth. The next few days felt like prepping for a heist, only instead of blueprints and getaway cars, we had fish tanks, thermometers, and a shared Google Doc called Operation Chomp. Joe took lead on the logistics. He knew exactly how to prep the piranhas for a short-term chlorinated dip without sending them belly up. Turns out, with the right pH buffer and some neutralizing tablets, we could buy them 3 to 4 hours of safe swim time. More than enough to make our point. We converted Joe's barn tank into a mobile setup, reinforced cooler, aeration pump, oxygen tablets, portable heater. It looked like a rolling sushi bar of doom. Each fish was separated for transport, then reintroduced to the group the day before release, so they'd be at peak Team Chomp mentality. Joe called it warming up the pack. I didn't ask questions. Meanwhile, the team was running silent ops across the neighborhood. Marcus monitored Karen's evening patterns with military precision. The Patel twins created a scent distraction, barbecued lamb, bless them, to draw Karen's dog walkers away from the pool path. Linda was in charge of lookout. She borrowed her grandson's walkie-talkies and patrolled from her porch like a retired spy. We set the date for Friday night. Weather forecast showed a cool evening, clear skies, low wind, perfect night for a secret swim or a rude aquatic awakening. Joe and I did a dry run the night before, drove the cooler in his van, parked 2 blocks away, and wheeled it down the sidewalk disguised in pool maintenance tarps. At the fence, I slipped through the gap near the back bushes where Karen's hedges had a weak spot. It was like the pool itself, wanted to be liberated. The intake valve sat near the deep end. Joe popped the hatch, tested the temp. 81 degrees, he whispered. Perfect. He dropped a test strip in. Chlorine's a bit high, could sting their eyes. You think they'll complain? I asked. He shrugged. Only if they unionize. We both grinned. It was ridiculous. It was insane. It was glorious. Back at Joe's, the piranhas were restless. Their scales glinted under the barn light, tiny teeth flashing with every movement. I leaned down to the tank, looked one dead in its little soulless eyes. You're not just fish, I told them. You're a message. Joe handed me a sealed bag of neutralizer. And tonight, that message bites. Everything was set. Timing, chemistry, escape routes. All we had to do now was wait. It was just past midnight when the garage door creaked open and Joe rolled out the cooler. We didn't speak much, just nods, the kind that said we were past the point of no return. The neighborhood was dead quiet, save for the hum of distant sprinklers and the occasional hoot of an owl. The moon hung low and full, casting silver over the pool like it had been waiting for this moment too. We parked 2 blocks down and wheeled the cooler behind the hedges. Linda's porch light flicked off, our signal. Marcus checked in on the walkie. No dog walkers, coast's clear. We slipped through the back fence gap and crept to the pool's edge. Joe popped the lid. The piranhas stirred instantly, little silver torpedoes with fire in their eyes. He dropped the neutralizer and the pH buffer into the cooler, swirled it, waited. Then we tipped the container over the maintenance panel and watched them flow, a living current of attitude and tiny razor blades. They vanished under the surface without a ripple. Perfect. We slipped away before the first ripple reached the center of the pool. From across the street, hidden behind Linda's rose bushes, we waited. At 12:37 a.m., the gate clicked open. Karen, robe on, floaty under one arm, wine tumbler in the other. She paused, scanned the area, then tiptoed in like a teenager sneaking out to meet trouble. She wasn't wearing shoes. That detail stuck with me. Her toes gripped the concrete like she owned it. She set down her bag, unrolled the flamingo floaty, and placed it in the shallow end. Then, with all the grace of a smug ballerina, she slipped off the robe and stepped into the water. I'll give her this, she moved confidently. One arm outstretched, holding the tumbler high, she waded in chest deep and let out a sigh like this was the happiest moment of her day. If only she knew. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. She floated lazily, sipped her wine, stared up at the stars. Then her face shifted. She jerked upright, looked down into the water, a sudden splash. Then another. She kicked toward the edge, but the flamingo blocked her. A ripple, a flash of silver. The wine tumbler tipped, then came the scream. It wasn't fear at first, just confusion. But it grew, twisted, broke into something primal. She scrambled onto the floaty, legs flailing, eyes wild. Another splash. Water slapped against the pool edge. Then she shrieked one word, over and over. Fish! Fish! From the bushes, Joe whispered, correction. Piranhas. And for the first time since this war began, I smiled. By sunrise, the piranhas were long gone. Joe had planned their extraction with military precision. Around 3 a.m., we'd slipped back in, scooped the fish using a wide siphon net system, and transferred them back into the cooler with neutralizing tablets and oxygen packs. They were back at his barn by 4:30, swimming happily like nothing had happened. But the aftermath, that was impossible to clean up. I was sipping my coffee on the porch at 7:15 when the first signs of chaos arrived. Karen's door flew open like it had been kicked by a SWAT team. She stormed out in oversized sunglasses, a towel over her head, like she was fleeing the plague, and marched straight toward the pool, yelling the whole way. She released something into the water, she screamed to no one and everyone. Behind her, Dave from the HOA board jogged to keep up, clipboard flapping, and poor Helen, the one who once cried over unapproved hydrangeas, looked like she hadn't slept since the Nixon administration. They burst through the gate. Karen waved her arm dramatically over the pool like it was a crime scene. They were here, dozens of them, sharp teeth. One of them stole my hair tie. Dave leaned over the water. Looks normal to me. Normal? She shrieked. Does normal slap your thigh at midnight and growl? Helen blinked. Piranhas growl? Karen jabbed her finger toward the deep end. I want the pool drained, now. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors in robes and slippers, dogs on leashes, phones in hand. Word had gotten out fast. The Patel twins stood by the fence munching on breakfast burritos like they'd paid for front-row tickets. Marcus leaned on his bike, pretending to scroll his phone. Linda sat in a lawn chair she'd rolled out at dawn, already crocheting what looked suspiciously like a piranha. I demand an emergency HOA vote, Karen hollered, pacing the pool deck like she was directing traffic at a disaster scene. This was biological warfare. Someone released an invasive species. We're under attack. At that exact moment, Dave pointed to the surface of the pool. Karen? What's that? She spun around. Floating in the middle of the water was her flamingo floaty, deflated, chewed in 3 places. It bobbed sadly, turning in slow circles. Someone in the crowd snorted. Another laughed. Karen's hands balled into fists. This is not a joke. But by then, phones were out, cameras rolling. And like that, the HOA's dirty little secret had just gone public. Karen was no longer the predator. She was the punchline. The first video dropped just before noon. It was shaky, grainy, and shot from behind a bush, but the audio was crystal clear. Karen's scream sliced through the internet like a hot knife, one long, high-pitched wail that started with surprise and ended with pure, undiluted terror. Someone had added slow motion just for effect. By the time I finished lunch, it had 40,000 views. An hour later, it was trending under the hashtag #Piranha Pool Karen. The best version came from Marcus, who'd set up his bike cam for neighborhood safety reasons. He posted a perfectly timed clip of Karen shouting, "Fish, fish!" while flailing her arms on the floaty, wine tumbler spinning through the air like a doomed satellite. TikTok got a hold of it next. Edits poured in, remixes, reaction videos. Someone dubbed over the Jaws theme and cut to the flamingo floaty being dragged in slow motion like a lifeboat in a storm. By dinner time, I was getting texts from my nephew in Portland. "Uncle Dave, is that your pool?" It didn't take long for the comments to shift from jokes to justice. People started sharing their own HOA horror stories, the strict rules, the crazy fines, the power-hungry board members on neighborhood ego trips. Karen became the unofficial face of everything people hated about HOAs. And then, of course, came the footage. See, Linda, sweet, crochet-loving, lemonade-pouring Linda, had her grandson set up a security camera months ago after Karen fined her for excessive wind ornamentation. Turns out it caught everything. Karen sneaking in through the gate at midnight, floating alone, screaming, fleeing in panic, but most importantly, it showed that the pool had been closed to everyone else, yet Karen had been using it like her personal country club. The hypocrisy couldn't have been clearer. That video hit 2 million views in 2 days. The local news called it a mysterious aquatic disruption at a suburban HOA pool. But the internet didn't need the details. They had the story. Karen's name trended for 48 hours. Her face, mid-scream, eyes wide, hair soaked, was plastered across meme pages, HOA reform forums, and one surprisingly well-produced EDM remix on SoundCloud. She tried to spin it, of course, claimed it was a prank, that she was the victim of environmental terrorism. But no one was buying it. Not after seeing her floating in a pool she claimed was off-limits to everyone else. For the first time, the rules weren't working in her favor. And the world was watching. The emergency HOA meeting was called for Saturday morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, held at the community clubhouse, the same place where Karen once handed out citations for unsanctioned folding chairs and banned red Solo cups for being visually disruptive. This time, though, she didn't walk in like a queen. She slinked. Her signature visor was gone, hair pulled back in a tight bun, no clipboard, just a thick folder clutched to her chest like it could protect her from what was coming. The room was packed, standing room only. Folks I hadn't seen at meetings in years showed up early with lawn chairs and iced coffees. Linda wore her "I crochet, not comply" t-shirt. The Patel twins rolled in with trays of donuts labeled "Taste of Freedom." Even Dave was there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but next to Karen. She cleared her throat at the front. "Before we begin, I'd like to address the recent incident." A few people chuckled. Someone in the back said, "You mean the fish?" Karen stiffened. "There has been an egregious act of sabotage, a violation of public safety, and I will not rest until the responsible parties are held accountable." That's when Linda stood up. "Karen," she said, voice calm and clear, "you fined me $75 for leaving a watering can on my porch. You told me it disrupted the aesthetic continuity. I paid it, quietly. But now I think it's time we talk about your violations." Applause. Then Marcus stood. "You made me recoil my hose in August, during a heat wave. You threatened to report me for negligent lawn disorder." More applause. One by one, people started standing. The Martinez family fined for Christmas lights in January. Mr. Jenkins, who got a citation for his melancholy wind chimes. A teenage girl who wasn't allowed to paint her mailbox teal because it was emotionally confusing to pedestrians. Karen's face paled with every testimony. "You closed the pool on all of us," said Mrs. Patel, "told us it was a hazard, then went swimming yourself every night while pretending it was unsafe?" Karen tried to interject. "That's not what happened." But Dave, the HOA's long-suffering treasurer, held up his hand. "Karen, we saw the footage." Silence. Dave turned to the crowd. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." Every hand went up, even Helen's. Karen looked around stunned, betrayed, outnumbered. And then she did something we'd never seen before. She sat down. No gavel, no protest, just silence. For the first time in years, the neighborhood had spoken, and the clipboard queen had no power left to hold. It was official by Monday. Karen Wexler, self-declared enforcer of order and laminated justice, had been voted out of her HOA presidency by a margin so wide even she couldn't contest it. 93% in favor of removal. The other 7% were probably her cats. Her rules went with her. The board wasted no time. The no flamingo decor clause? Gone. The no unattended towels policy? Torched. The 3-page regulation on mailbox font uniformity? Shredded in a symbolic ceremony involving a garden mulcher and a crowd that cheered like it was the Super Bowl. But the real victory came on Thursday morning. That's when they reopened the pool. No red tape, no reservations, no inspection day dramatics. Just a welcome sign written in sidewalk chalk by someone's kid that said, "Pool's open, bring fun." I got there early with my grandkids. Ellie wore her favorite unicorn floaty, and my grandson had a super soaker, nearly as big as he was. I watched them sprint through the gate like it was Christmas morning, squealing, slipping, cannonballing into that water like it had been waiting for them all along. And for the first time in weeks, maybe years, I breathed easy. Neighbors trickled in. Marcus brought music. Linda had crocheted bright, ridiculous cozies for the pool fence poles. The Patels handed out spicy lemonade and samosas. Old man Jenkins set up a wind chime next to the diving board. Big brass tubes that rang like church bells every time someone splashed. It wasn't just a swim. It was a reclaiming, a reminder that the pool didn't belong to Karen. It belonged to us, the neighborhood. The people who laughed too loud, whose grass grew an inch too high, who forgot to roll in the trash bins by sundown every now and then. The celebration lasted all day. Someone brought a grill. Someone else brought karaoke. Even Helen showed up, blushing and holding a tray of cookies shaped like tiny piranhas. We made space for her. Because that's what neighbors do. As the sun dipped behind the houses, casting gold across the water, I sank into a lounge chair, drink in hand, towel over my shoulder, my towel, unattended, gloriously unmonitored. I looked at the pool, now glowing under soft string lights, and couldn't help but laugh. Karen wanted power, she got piranhas. And we got our pool back. No tags, no threats, no fear, just water and freedom. The days after the pool reopened felt like waking up from a long, strange dream. No more passive-aggressive notes on doorsteps. No new rules taped to the mailbox. No weekly surprise inspections of shrub height. Just quiet. Just people waving to each other again instead of peeking through blinds. It was weird at first, like the neighborhood forgot how to breathe freely. But then something shifted. Mr. Simmons organized a movie night on his lawn. The Patels started offering cooking classes on weekends. Linda's knitting group expanded into a full-on craft circle, and her wind chimes? Let's just say there were now 7 of them, each one louder and more emotionally disruptive than the last, and nobody cared. The HOA board, now led by Dave, who turned out to be way less of a pushover without Karen lurking, rolled back a dozen policies and introduced just one new rule. Don't be a jerk. Simple. Beautiful. One afternoon I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just the words, "I hope you're proud of yourself," written in that unmistakably pointy handwriting. Inside was a photo of a new housing development across town, Serenity Glen. Below it, visors optional, but encouraged. I laughed for a full 5 minutes. Karen hadn't disappeared. She'd relocated. Let someone else deal with her midnight rule enforcement and flamingo bans. We'd already had our time in the trenches. As for the piranhas, Joe kept them for a while in his barn tanks, fed them well, gave them names. Speedy, Nibbles, Justice. Eventually, they were rehomed to a private aquarium 2 towns over. The staff said they were surprisingly cooperative. I like to think they felt accomplished. I still walk by the pool most mornings, coffee in hand. Sometimes Ellie and my grandson join me. They wave at neighbors, chase dragonflies, and tell me which floaty they're going to use next. Every time I see them splash into the water without a care in the world, I feel something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight for too long. Control is a strange thing. People like Karen think it keeps a place safe, neat, predictable. But all it really does is squeeze the life out of it. Sometimes, to restore balance, you don't need a meeting. You need a message. And sometimes that message has scales, teeth, and a very short temper. I didn't set out to be a hero. I just wanted my pool back. But in the end, we got more than that. We got our neighborhood back. And all it took was one good bite.